Hello again, and welcome to Media War Stories, behind the scenes tales from the front lines of the media. I'm your host, Tom Curley, and as you know, normally I was a director at CBS for almost 40 years, and I talk with old friends, old coworkers, and we tell war stories, stuff that happened behind the scenes, stuff that happened in front of the camera. But this week is really special. We are talking with Brian McKinley, a historian, all around nice guy, who has done a project called the WRHU 60th Anniversary Yearbook. Uh, uh, Tell us about it. Tell us about who you are and how the hell you started this project, because it's really fascinating.
Thanks, Tom. It's called the Hofstra Radio Alumni Audio Yearbook, and I started producing it about 4 years ago when we were at the high point of the pandemic and everybody was Zooming. And I was at Hofstra Radio in the 1990s, from 1990 to 94. And I always felt a special kinship with the station because I was there at the tail end of the Jeff Krause era, and I was there at the beginning of the Bruce Avery era. And so I felt like myself and my friends were a link between the old world and the new world, between the old buildings and the new buildings. And we had all this time on our hands and we were communicating via Zoom. And I thought, let me start recording an oral history of the radio station and see if it works. So I conned about 15 of my friends who were there in the 90s and said, would you try this out? And they said, sure, why not? And we tried it, and people seemed to like it, and I did absolutely nothing with it. I kind of sat on it for a little while because I didn't know if it should be a podcast or just an archive or it should be a radio show. And eventually I came back and started asking people like yourself and Gary Armstrong and Todd Ant and all these amazing people who've worked at Hofstra Radio over the years. And to my shock, people said, yeah, I'll talk about Hofstra Radio. Let's go. A lot of people didn't know me. They didn't know anything about the project, but they figured, let's tell some stories. And now we've got 175 different people have done interviews and more than 200 recorded interviews. You yourself have done more than one interview. So 4 years later, I can't believe this is a thing that's happened and it's still going. It just blows my mind.
Wow. Wow. It blows my I'm sitting here proud that this is episode 49 of Media War
Hmm.
Stories, and you've done over 200. I I am not worthy. I am not worthy. We're not worthy. We're not worthy. Awesome.
Ah.
Absolutely amazing.
Little bit
Just
obsessive.
go
I
ahead.
got a little crazy.
Yeah.
And you know how hard it is to sort of wrangle people together to do things. And I just felt like it was important to get these stories on record. And once you get started, and I did not anticipate this, once I got to meeting people and talking to people, I just I just wanted to hear more stories. I just wanted to make more connections and see what people had to say. So it's become quite addictive.
That's great. That is great. Unbelievable. Um, you're right. Wow. I seem to remember doing the first one a long time ago. If you've been doing this for
Yeah.
years, I think I was one of your earlier, because I remember I
I
found out about you from Gary and Marilyn Armstrong, who they called me
mhm.
up one day. They said, we just got interviewed by this really nice guy from Hofstra about our time at Hofstra. And, they were both in pig heaven because they were both, you know, heavily involved in the early history
To say the
of
least,
of
yeah.
uh, of Hofstra, and uh, I was at the tail end. I started in 1969 through 1974, so I was there during that era, and I know we
Mhm.
crossed paths because I was teaching in the late '80s at the music department and doing a lot of projects for the radio station. By that
Mhm.
point, you had I remember we had, I guess the little theater was closed. The
Yep.
original studio was closed, which was ironic. It wasn't until after. it was closed. And I remember one night sitting at Jeff's house, um, having a cognac and talking about nothing in particular. And he said, you know, uh, the theater, the control room, the studio, it was condemned. I said, what do you mean? He said, oh, it was condemned from the very beginning by the fire department. He said, think about it. There was only one entrance. It was a fire hazard. He said, nothing was supposed to be built there. I said, how did you get away with it? He said, nobody ever noticed. Nobody ever asked. So, so
That's
it
amazing.
was a fine. I know.
I,
There was
I'm
a
so
lot of stuff.
thrilled to learn these stories. I think people should know about it. I think people should have a sense of
Oh,
where the station started, and you know what it is now and the various steps to
yes.
get there. I think it's just so worthwhile. It's such an amazing station and community, but where things were and where things are now, it's what a
Where
journey. What a journey. So I'm
are
thrilled to talk to people about it.
the journey is amazing. Before I was there, you have to realize, well, in the early history of the radio station, anytime Hofstra became aware that the radio station existed, the administration, they tried to
Yeah.
shut it down. Okay, so
Yeah.
we were always, doing our own fundraisers. Now, I remember once before I got there, had to be in probably the early '60s. Um, they wanted to close the thing down, and Jeff formed an organization called Clomp. Now, I don't remember what it stood for, but he got all the handicapped kids in the university to protest the the closing of the radio station. So here you had a dozen or so kids in wheelchairs, on crutches, and Jeffrey had a club foot, so he was technically handicapped, and they all just marched in front of the administration building. And of course the administration backed down because, how are you going to go against a bunch of handicapped people? It was amazing. And then there was another story I never told you. The
Okay.
little theater, you went down a long staircase, okay? And at the bottom of the staircase was a grate, all right, which you would think went to a cistern. It was a drainage ditch, but it wasn't.
Mhm.
It was just a grate over a ditch. All right. Now, why the ditch was there, I don't know, but it wasn't a drainage ditch. And one of the problems with the little theater was the nearest bathroom was a little far away. I mean, there wasn't
Yeah.
one in the little
Building
theater.
over.
There was building over. So lots of times, people that worked in the plant department would have a habit, and this was before my time too, would have a habit of basically going down and relieving themselves on the grate, okay? Which, in that it was not a drainage ditch, began to smell.
Mm.
Sort of like, the connecting tunnel between the shuttle and the one train, in Times Square.
Yeah.
So Jeff, and I don't remember whether it was just him or somebody else, they decided to teach whoever was doing this a lesson. He took a wire and connected it to an electrical socket and connected it to the grate. And they sat in wait. And sure enough, one night, the plant department guy went down the stairs, and you heard a tinkle, tinkle, and then this blue flash and a scream. Ah! At this point, Jeff went, gee, maybe I shouldn't have done that. I might have killed the guy. Well, which he might have. I don't think so. However, he did solve the problem. Nobody ever used that as a rest stop ever again. So yes, the
Wow.
trajectory has been fascinating, and so what are your
Well, along those lines, in the 1980s, there's a great story from Mike Larkin and a few other people were there. They had just built the new studios in Memorial Hall downstairs from the ramp. and they had put up all kinds of new equipment and the soundproofing, and the bathroom, the men's bathroom that was at the top of the ramp, flooded. And all that water came down into the brand new studios and flooded the thing out. And Mike has a great version of the story where he shows up because he was the station manager, and the plant department guy is standing there in 3 inches of water and sewage. And Mike goes, "What happened?" And the guy goes, "What do you mean?" Just so I I don't think things have happened to that nature in the new building, but maybe we can find out. Maybe we'll get more stories about that. Let's hope not.
Wow, I hope not too. Oh,
Yeah.
that's funny. Uh, One time was had to be in the 80s, the morning news. They on the roof of the CBS broadcast center, they were going to install a satellite dish. Back then, satellite dishes were big. I mean, the really big
Yeah.
ones. So they drilled a hole in the roof to put the mast for the antenna, but they hadn't put the antenna in, and they put a tarp over it, or they forgot. Well, anyway, it rained like hell, and that water somehow went through the whole CBS broadcast center and ended up as a waterfall on top of the switcher in control room 43, which is where we did the morning news and they did the NFL today. We come in at 3 o'clock in the morning and there's literally water. Like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Well, back then we would simply move to another control room, as we had a bunch of them on the second floor. But I was doing audio at the time. And what I said, and the guy I was working with, Joe, he said, well, look, to move the whole audio operation all the way, we'd have to unpatch this, patch it up. It's about 1,000 patches. The audio booth is working just fine because we were in a different room. So why don't we just stay here and you guys come over there and we'll just feed us to the other control room, which is what we did. And everything went fine, except during the actual show. As people would come in, they would come into 43 to see an empty control room, completely empty, and yet the show was on the air. And then they would go into the audio booth where everything was completely normal, and we're doing the show, and people would go, what's going on? What do you mean? What's going on? Well, where is everybody? And we go like, oh my God, where the hell are they? It was really weird. But so yeah, there's a lot of crazy stories, and I
Yeah.
can't you've heard them all. I mean, I'm fascinating. Did anybody tell you the story when Jeffrey got kidnapped by a bear at the
During
annual
the dinner, yes. Yeah, I believe that's
the
a Mike
dinner?
Larkin story as well. Mike D'Antonio, yeah. Yeah, it's a famous one.
Oh,
That's
so
good. I'll send you the
can you
episode
give it?
number. It's good.
Can you give it to
I
me
think it
from
was
their
when
perspective?
yeah. I think what happened was they were maybe it was the new antenna or it was a big event that they had gone, or maybe they had changed the call letters. I remember Mike saying it was a big event and they were real happy about it, and Jeff was giving remarks, and someone, I think in a gorilla costume, was it a bear costume or a gorilla costume, one or the other, ran
It
up
was a
to
gorilla
Jeff
costume.
behind the podium, grabbed him and just pulled him away, and just disrupted the whole scene. And some people were absolutely over the moon about it, thought it was the funniest thing ever. And some people said, well, wait a minute, we just did all this stuff and we did all this. And, in classic Hofstra radio fashion, there are many, many versions of the story. And some people loved it and some people didn't. But that was
Would
classic dinner material.
Would you like to know the real story?
I do. I would. Don't tell anybody else, just between
Okay.
us.
No, 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 no. And all right. Every year we would have a big dinner. I imagine they probably still. There'd be a big dinner
Hmm.
for the radio station where they would give out awards and announce who was going to be next year's station manager and program director and chief engineer and all that stuff. And every year back then, there were a group of alumni. Mark Weiner, George Berger, Chris Sizzo, me, Frank Dunn, if he was there, Gary Armstrong. And we would play a practical joke on him every year. It would be something silly. And it got to the point where everybody expected us to do it. It was sort of like part of the show. And so one year, matter of fact, the year before this event, after the show, I was at Jeffrey's house having a cognac, as we were wont to do. And I said, Jeff, don't you get sick of every year the alumni, playing a practical joke on you and you've got to put up with it? And he went, yeah. I said, you want to get even with us? And he went, wow. He said, why don't we play a practical joke on them next year? All right. And he said, what do you want to do? I said, I want a guy in a gorilla costume to come and kidnap you in the middle of the thing and take you out. And he said, why is that funny? I said, because you're not coming back. Now, everybody will immediately blame us for doing the prank. Well, I heard a guy named Kevin, a Hofstra alumni. He was our producer at the morning news, and an old Hofstra alumni. We rented a gorilla costume, and we did just that. And I didn't quite calculate just how much this was going to blow up. Well, all hell broke loose. Okay. Everybody, of course, started pointing fingers at George Berger and Mark Weiner. And of course, they were all denying it because they didn't do it. The only person they didn't yell at was me, which I thought was hilarious. Chris Sizzo, it got so bad, Chris Sizzo actually went next door there was a Mexican restaurant next door, and he was in the kitchen grabbing people who couldn't speak English going, have you seen a gorilla carrying a guy with a beard over his shoulder? So now the problem was, what I didn't realize is we couldn't plan when it happened. And I do feel bad about this, and I felt bad about this for years. It was right in the middle. Frank Grunstein, God bless him, had done this amazing movie about raising the antenna, moving the antenna to the top of Tower C. Okay? And it happened right in the middle of airing the film, and it ruined it. And he was livid. And I truly, truly felt bad. So it was all my fault. Although the beauty of it was as after the event, which is what happened every year, all of us would go to Jeff's house, Mark and George and everybody. And of course they all walked in, and there was Jeff in his smoking jacket, puffing on a pipe with this smile on his face. And they all realized, he said, all right, you got me. But yeah, that's I would love to hear it from other perspectives, but that's the actual truth behind that story.
That's a great story. We've got a couple of perspectives on that, and it sounds like classic Hofstra radio. Someone comes up with an idea. Hey, why don't we try this with no plan, with no idea of what's going to happen, and you try it out. I mean, that's what this podcast was. That's what half of my programming decisions were when I was program director. It's like, let's do a show just about local bands. Let's do a show where there's no format. Let's do this. And most of them worked out. A couple were giant failures, but most of the time we just figured, let's have fun. Let's try something and let's do it, because we had that sort of safety net, and we had the encouragement. We had you could walk in with any crazy idea and say, what about doing this? And people would go, yeah, all right, I'm down with that. And it was often a really bad idea or never made it to air. But that was just one of the amazing things. And it doesn't matter if you were there in 1968 or 78 or 88 or 98. It doesn't matter when you were there. There's always someone who's like, I'll try that. Let's go. And let's see what happens. And that's one of the big through lines of this project. Is just everybody's always willing to jump in, and you don't always get that in the professional world or the grown-up world. You don't get that.
No.
And I hope people who
No.
are there appreciate it and enjoy it while you can.
Yes. Yes. They they truly. Well, I got it. I mean, my perfect
Yeah,
example is we just did a recent thing with you. The show I did in my senior year, Fulton's Folly, which was all
it's great.
experimental and totally done because I realized I was never going to have the opportunity to be
Yeah,
as openly creative to do whatever I want, have the resources because I was going to be working, for ABC, CBS, and it's not like they're open to ideas from guys that run the audio mixer or even
right.
directors. So to encourage the kids, Jeffrey loved audio, radio drama, so we did a
Yeah.
lot of that. And some years we would have a bunch that were really into it, some were not. I don't know when your tenure, when you were there, how much it was, but I was telling you before, it was fascinating. Uh, it had to be 80s, maybe early 90s, and
Yeah.
I come down to the Memorial Hall, and Jeffrey's going, "Oh, guess what happened?" And what he says, "I'm here the other day, and I see a bunch of kids. They're over in the corner, and they're huddled around a tape recorder." And I walk over, and they're listening to like a 10th generation dub of Fulton's Folly. And
Hmm.
I said, I went, "Well, what are you listening to?" He says, "Oh, it's my friend of mine at Bar has this show. He's like, he has a copy of it. Isn't this really cool?" And Jeff went, "Oh, you want to hear the originals?" I went, "What?" He said, they're
Yeah.
in the archive room next door." He said, "That show was done here." And I went, "What?" Huh? No knowledge. Uh, but yeah, it's cool. Yeah, the radio station now is now loved by the university. I mean, that's what I find
Yeah.
amazing. They not only
Yeah.
support it, it gets awards, uh, which is just, I mean, it is just such a wonderful thing. And you're right, it was Jeff's legacy. He fought for that building. He fought for years,
Yeah.
years to get that building in, where is it? In Adams? It's next to Adams Hall, right?
It's
Uh,
Well, now it's the Herbert School of Communication, and it was a
oh,
addition originally to the Dempster Communications building, which I think it was called at the time. I think it's now all the Herbert School. But yeah,
oh, okay, yeah,
I
Dempster Hall.
remember in 1992, 1993, they hadn't started building that yet, and we had all kinds of questions. They had cleared a bunch of trees, they had cleared a bunch of space for it, but nothing was happening. And I know behind the scenes, Sue Zizza was very involved in making sure those plans went forward. And then when Bruce Avery was hired in 1994, and then he took it and added on, and it continued to grow from there. But we had real concerns about what would happen to the station when Jeff took ill in the early 90s. And we didn't know what would happen. And we couldn't have imagined what would come next when the university fully got behind the radio station. And now, all these years later, like you said, the awards and the people who are working in media, there's so many people who got their start. And so many people I talk to, and they say, "Oh, we used to do this crazy show on Sunday nights called Anarchy." And I'm so happy because that's a show that we developed to,
Develop.
throw off the format a little bit, and you can do whatever you wanted and
Hmm.
be creative and challenge yourself. And people say, "Oh, the Rock and Roll Oasis," or this thing or that thing that we developed in the 90s, or other programs or technologies that came in. It's so cool to see how that built up, and that goes back to, Jeff Krause in the
Oh,
1960s, and
absolutely.
Gary
It all,
Armstrong, and
it all.
yourself, and
Mm-hmm.
and all these amazing
Yep.
people over the years built it up. And I hope that this podcast, that this story helps people remember where we came from, and to keep track of where we're going. Cause it's amazing. It's
Yeah.
amazing what they're doing
It
now.
is.
Just blows my mind.
It's. I know. Me too. I mean, because I was there at the very beginnings. Like for instance, I was there when the communications department was basically first started. It was George Gordon
Hmm.
and Frank Easy. Okay, and then
Yep.
Bill Wren. He
Hmm.
became a teacher. Eventually, became the head of the department. And Jeff was a teacher. And I remember we taught a basic television course that Bill taught, Bill Wren. And the problem was is that the TV side had no audio. They had no audio. So we had to we had to teach the audio section at the radio station, which I taught, and I was taking the class, which was a little weird. Because I remember, like when
Right.
we had the final exam, I would have to call Bill over, and I'd say, "Bill, this question, it's you can't do that. That's just makes no sense." He's all right. Ignore question 13. Um, but it evolved. They had their original studio was in Memorial Hall. It was down the hall from our offices, and it was just a big space. And all they had was three old Plimicon. Remember those old with the rack lenses that had four different lenses, and you had
Mm-hmm.
to change it. Okay, we had
Yeah.
three of those and a tape recorder. Uh, I don't know whether it was a helical scan, but you
Wow.
had one. Nope, just recording. All right. So I remember we had one directing class, and there weren't too many people in it. I'm blanking on her name. She became the head of the department. It'll come to me. Anyway, all of us would contribute. We would be cameramen, whatever. And the project they were doing, this was their advanced project, was they were doing the final scene from Plaza Suite, the one where the bride is locked in the bathroom and she won't come out, and the whole scene is the mother and the father trying to talk her into coming out. And at the end of the scene,
Mm.
the very last thing is the door opens, the bride is there, and she says,
I'm ready now.
that's it. That's her whole line, right? So we go through this whole 20 minutes. It's all live, nothing taped, no editing abilities. And we do this whole multi camera shoot, and we get to the end, and opens the door, and the actress playing the bride goes, "What's my motivation?" And you heard this scream from the control room. Nancy comes running out. I swear to God, I thought she was going to kill this person. And she's going, "What's your motivation? Your motivation is to say the effing line." So we had to do the whole thing from the beginning, all
Oh
over
no.
again. The other project, but the guy did, he went to Jeff, and the play needed, for some reason, something had to be on fire. He said, "How do I film something on fire?" And Jeff said, "Well, what you do is you get a baking tin, and you take some steel wool and dip it in gasoline, okay, and then light it and put it underneath the camera lens, and the flames will come up and you shoot through it." He said, "Okay." The only problem is the guy didn't dip the steel wool in gasoline. He doused it in gasoline and then lit it. So all of a sudden, we're doing this thing, and the whole room fills up with black smoke. Nobody can see anything. Panic ensues. We had to evacuate the building. There was much yelling and screaming. That was the beginning of the communications department, and now you look at it, and it's a well-oiled machine, and they've got real studios
Yeah.
and everything. So
It's amazing how everything's connected now too. Yeah. All the facilities are connected, everything's together one place. It's amazing.
I know it's really really well integrated, and I don't hate to say it. That was, I think, in a large way, Mark Weiner was responsible for that.
Yes.
Mark and Mullen, they really computerized and upgraded everything,
Yeah.
and I
It's
still love the
amazing.
fact I haven't been there. I haven't been there in a few years, but I love the fact that it was Mark, I think, that did this. There's a Studer quarter-inch tape deck sitting in one of the studios, and I said, "What's that doing there?" He said, "Oh, I leave it there because nobody has any idea what it is or what it does." And I just thought that was hilarious. But yeah, we've you know we've
That's
we've
great.
come a long way, and I say more power to them. There's a member
Absolutely.
anywhere in the world you can go, especially in the country, in the media, and chances are you will find a WVHC, WRHU graduate.
Yep.
And that was it. Well, anyway, this has been fun. We've wasted a half hour. Walk through another one. This has been great. Uh,
Thank you.
a
Thank you.
different,
Yes.
but in the same, exactly the same. I mean, you are doing exactly what this show is supposed to do, and you've done it on a level that I am just again in awe of. So thanks for coming
Thank you.
on. Keep up the good work, and we'll check in again later. So let's see. Quick to the plugs. Got to do the plugs. Serendipity: Seeking Intelligent Life on Earth. The blog I contribute to along with Gary Armstrong. Voicescapes Audio Theater for the best in radio drama and comedy. A half-hour radio show. Something else we have to do a show about. In the future, it's still here. It's available online, and of course, my sister podcast, Get Off My Lawn, starring me, where we talk about life, the universe, and everything. So, Brian, this has been great. Till the next time,
Thank
see
you.
ya.